The weight of compliance. A regimental scribe's testament. They called me efficient. For 6 years and 4 months, I had transcribed combat orders for the 94th Cadian Shock Regiment, converting tactical vox transmissions into permanent record, maintaining casualty logs with precision that earned 3 commendations from command, filing after action reports that documented the Emperors were made manifest through las, fire, and bayonet. I never questioned the numbers. I never asked why certain companies were assigned to certain operations. I believed the system worked because I was part of it, and it rewarded my diligence. My name is Tobias Herne. I served as Regimental Scribe 2nd Class, attached to Command Platoon Headquarters. And I want you to understand something before I tell you what I learned. I loved my work. I took pride in it. When the first discrepancy appeared in the casualty projections for Operation Granite Fist, I assumed it was my error. I spent 3 hours searching for my mistake. I found something worse. The archive chamber where I worked was maintained at 16 degrees Celsius, cold enough that my breath misted when I spoke aloud to verify dictation accuracy, cold enough to preserve parchment and data, slates from the moisture that plagued the barracks. My station occupied the 3rd alcove on the western wall, positioned beneath a flickering lumen strip that hummed at a frequency I had learned to ignore. Every morning at the 6th hour I would arrive, sign the attendance logbook with my personal seal, activate my transcription cogitator, and begin processing the previous day's tactical communications. The work followed a rhythm that I found comforting. Vox, recording playback, transcription to parchment primary, verification against tactical map coordinates, cross, reference with squad manifests, filing in chronological order within the appropriate campaign folder. By the 9th hour, I would break for rations, a protein bar and recaf that tasted of metal and ash. Then return to continue until the 18th hour, when the night shift scribe would relieve me. I had processed an estimated 4,200 combat orders during my service. I knew the vocabulary of military necessity by heart. Advance, hold, withdraw, suppress, eliminate, secure. I understood that casualties were inevitable, that the Guard's strength lay in endless manpower, that individual lives meant nothing against the imperative of victory. The commissar, instructor at the Schola Progenium, where I received my training, had been explicit about this. He said the Emperor loved humanity, not humans. That we were bullets in his infinite arsenal. That to question the expenditure of ammunition was to question marksmanship itself. I believed him because the alternative was doubt, and doubt was the first step toward heresy. I recited the litany of compliance every morning before beginning work. My hands serve the Imperium. My thoughts align with command. My faith transcends understanding. I am the record, not the judge. The words settled my mind, prepared me for the day's documentation of death rendered into bureaucratic necessity. The cogitator at my station was a sacred machine, blessed by a tech priest during the regiment's founding ceremonies 7 years before my assignment. Its keys required specific pressure to register input. Its screen flickered green with amber text. Its prayer scrolls hung from copper fixtures that I polished every 7th day as maintenance ritual dictated. I treated it with reverence because it was older than me, had served scribes before me, would serve scribes after me. The continuity of service mattered. I was not important. The record was important. Sometimes I would see other scribes in the refectory, and we would speak briefly about filing systems, about proper citation formatting, about the satisfaction of completing a particularly complex campaign archive. We did not discuss the content of what we transcribed. That would have been inappropriate. Our role was preservation, not interpretation. The regimental chapel stood adjacent to the archive complex. close enough that I could hear the morning hymns through the ventilation system when the air cyclers aligned correctly. I attended services every third day, kneeling on stone worn smooth by decades of supplicants, listening to Chaplain Voss speak about duty and sacrifice with a voice that carried absolute certainty. He never wavered. He never expressed doubt. His faith was a wall, impenetrable and eternal. I wanted to be like him. I wanted my faith to be so complete that questions could not penetrate it. After services, I would light a candle for the Emperor's guidance, drop 2 thrown gelt into the offering box, and return to my work feeling purified. The ritual mattered because it connected me to something larger than casualty counts and coordinate strings. It reminded me why the deaths I documented served a purpose beyond comprehension. My supervisor, archivist, Principal Mira Dresch, was a woman of 50, 3 years with augmetic fingers that clicked softly when she sorted parchment. She had served for 31 years, had trained 7 scribes before me, and knew the archive's organizational systems with totality that approached machine perfection. She taught me that efficiency was a form of worship, that proper filing honored the Emperor, that our work kept chaos at bay by maintaining order in the records. When I made errors in my first months, she corrected them without anger, explaining that precision was learned through repetition, that I would improve. She was right. By my second year, my error rate had dropped to 0.03%. By my 4th year, I could transcribe a combat order while simultaneously cross-referencing 3 previous operations without losing accuracy. She told me I had a gift for the work, that I should consider advancement to archivist. Tertiary, once I completed my 8th year. I wanted that. I wanted to prove worthy of her faith in me. The day I found the first discrepancy began like any other. Morning bells at the 5th hour, ablutions and prayers. Arrival at my station by the 6th hour. The night shift scribe, a nervous young man named Peter who always looked exhausted, handed me the transfer logbook and departed without speaking. I activated my cogitator, loaded the Vox recordings from the previous day's operations, and began processing. 3rd Company had been assigned to advance on grid coordinate 774 Alpha during the assault on Hive Primus. 6th Company had secured the water reclamation facility at grid 812 Beta. 9th Company had held the transit hub against counter-assault at grid 745 Gamma. Standard urban warfare operations. The casualty estimates attached to each order followed predictable patterns based on enemy strength assessments and terrain difficulty. 3rd Company estimated 23% casualties. 6th Company estimated 18% casualties. 9th Company estimated 41% casualties due to exposed positions and heavy weapon emplacements. Then I reached the orders for 7th Company. The Vox recording played in my ear, Colonel Harsk's voice steady and professional as always. 7th Company was to advance through grid coordinate 698 Delta, a residential sector listed in the tactical survey as lightly defended, minimal enemy presence, civilian population already evacuated. The estimated casualty rate attached to the order was 67%. I stopped transcribing. I replayed the recording. Lightly defended, minimal enemy presence, 67% casualties. The numbers contradicted themselves. If the sector was lightly defended, casualties should be proportionally lower, perhaps 15 to 20%. I checked the tactical map data slate. Grid 698 Delta showed 3 confirmed enemy positions with small arms only. No heavy weapons, no fortifications. I checked the squad manifest for 7th Company. 214 guardsmen, standard loadout. Adequate ammunition and support. I assumed I had misheard the recording. I replayed it 4 times. The words remained unchanged. Lightly defended, 67%. I checked my previous transcriptions from the past month, searching for similar discrepancies. Most operations showed logical correlation between threat assessment and casualty projection. But I found 3 others where the numbers seemed inverted. A fortified position estimated at 12% casualties, an open advance against entrenched armor estimated at 9%, and one that made my hands pause over the cogitator keys. A sweep and clear operation in an abandoned manufacturing district with confirmed 0 enemy presence. Estimated casualty rate of 34%. How do you take casualties from an enemy that is not there? I told myself there were explanations I did not understand. Perhaps the tactical surveys were incomplete. Perhaps enemy forces were more mobile than initial reconnaissance suggested. Perhaps command possessed intelligence I was not cleared to access. My role was transcription, not tactical analysis. I was not qualified to question the projections. The litany of compliance existed precisely for moments like this. My faith must transcend understanding. I transcribed the orders exactly as recorded, filed them appropriately, and moved to the next set of communications. But the numbers stayed in my mind like splinters beneath skin. 67%. 0 enemy presence. 34%. I completed my shift at the 18th hour, signed the transfer logbook, and walked back to my quarters through corridors lit by failing lumen strips that cast shadows where none should exist. That night I could not sleep. I lay on my cot in the barracks dormitory, listening to the other scribes breathe in the darkness, and I tried to pray the doubt away. The Emperor protects. The Emperor provides. The Emperor's will is absolute and beyond mortal comprehension. But my mind kept returning to the numbers. In 6 years of service, I had developed an instinct for patterns in the data. Casualty rates followed predictable curves. Enemy strength correlated with friendly losses. Terrain difficulty modified engagement outcomes. These were not mysteries. These were mathematics. And the mathematics for Operation Granite Fist did not function correctly. Unless there was another variable I had not considered. Unless the projections accounted for something the tactical surveys did not mention. I decided to investigate quietly. Not because I doubted the Imperium's righteousness. Not because I questioned command's wisdom, but because I needed to understand my error, to identify what I had missed, so I could transcribe more accurately in the future. That is what I told myself. That my investigation served efficiency, not doubt. I can see now that I was already beginning the transformation I did not yet recognize. Faith and doubt are not opposites. They are neighbors separated by a wall so thin you can pass through it without noticing, until you are already on the other side. The archive complex contained not only current operational records, but also historical campaign files, dating back to the regiment's founding. Access required authorization, but my position granted me retrieval privileges for cross-referencing purposes. During my next shift, I filed a standard request for Campaign Archive 773 Tertius, the regiment's previous deployment to the world we currently occupied. Archivist Principal Dresch approved the request without question. She trusted me. I had never given her reason not to. The archive servitor, a lobotomized thing that had once been human and now existed only to retrieve and shelve documents, delivered the requested files to my station within 20 minutes. Its agmetic eyes whirred and clicked as it placed the storage cylinder on my desk, then shuffled away with the mechanical gait of something that had forgotten how to move naturally. Campaign Archive 773 Tertius contained operational records from 6 years prior, the last time the 94th Cadian had fought on this world. I began reading with the stated purpose of comparing tactical patterns to improve my current transcription context. What I found was a mirror. Operation Thunder March, 9th Company, assigned to advance through residential sector, minimal enemy presence. 62% estimated casualties. Operation Steel Harvest 4th Company sweep and clear of abandoned industrial zone. 0 confirmed enemies, 28% estimated casualties. Operation Crimson Dawn. 11th Company holding action at lightly defended checkpoint, 71% estimated casualties. The pattern repeated through 17 separate operations. High casualty projections in low threat environments. Low casualty projections in high threat environments. It was inverted. Deliberately inverted. I felt cold, and not from the archive's temperature. I checked the after-action reports that followed each operation. The actual casualty numbers matched the projections with statistical precision. 9th Company had indeed suffered 62% losses in the residential sector. 4th Company had taken 28% casualties in the abandoned industrial zone where no enemy had been present. The guardsmen had died exactly as projected, in environments where they should not have died at all. Or rather, where they would not have died if dying was accidental. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my desk until the tremor stopped. There were explanations. There had to be explanations. Perhaps enemy forces had repositioned between reconnaissance and assault. Perhaps the tactical surveys were deliberately misleading to maintain operational security. Perhaps I was misunderstanding the data because I lacked command level context. I requested campaign archives for 2 additional deployments. 6, 8, 9 Secundus and 7, 2, 1 Quintus. Operations on different worlds against different enemies. The archive servitor delivered them without question. I read through the night, ignoring the shift change, ignoring Archivist, Principal Dresch, when she paused at my station to ask if I required assistance. I told her I was conducting comprehensive cross-reference analysis to improve filing protocols. She smiled and told me such dedication would be noted in my advancement review. Then she left me alone with the archives and the truth they contained. Every deployment, every campaign. For 12 years of regimental history, the pattern held. Companies assigned to low threat objectives suffered high casualties. Companies assigned to high threat objectives suffered low casualties. The inversion was total and consistent, and the after-action reports confirmed that actual losses matched projections within 2% variance. The guardsmen died where they were projected to die, when they were projected to die, in numbers that had been calculated before the operations began. This was not tactical miscalculation. This was not intelligence failure. This was arithmetic. Someone had decided how many guardsmen would die, then assigned them to operations that would produce those deaths, then documented the results as combat necessity. I found the authorization buried in Archive 7, 3 Tertius, a single line in an annexure to the campaign orders. Casualties allocated per Departamento Munitorum, Directive 7 Kappa. Force attrition compliance for recruitment quota maintenance. I read it 7 times. I looked up Directive 7 Kappa in the regulatory index. It was not there. The directive was referenced but not explained, cited but not included, present only as justification for something I was not cleared to understand. I searched through 11 years of archives. Directive 7 Kappa appeared in every campaign, always in the same context, always as authorization for casualty allocation, not casualty projection. Allocation. The word meant assignment, distribution, deliberate apportionment. They were killing their own guardsmen to meet quotas. The thought arrived fully formed, and I tried immediately to reject it. This was heresy. This was madness. This was impossible because if it were true, then everything I believed, everything I served, everything that gave my life meaning was built on murder dressed as duty. I looked for alternative explanations with desperate focus. Perhaps allocation meant something different in military terminology. Perhaps it referred to acceptable loss thresholds. Perhaps I was misinterpreting bureaucratic language because I was not trained in Departamento Munitorum protocols. I needed to find someone who could explain this to me. Someone I trusted. Someone who would correct my misunderstanding and restore the certainty that was crumbling in my chest like rotted parchment. Archivist, Principal Dresch had served for 31 years. She had processed archives from campaigns I had not yet been born to witness. She would know. She would explain. I would confess my confusion, and she would illuminate my error, and I would return to my work with faith restored. I found her in her private office, a small room adjacent to the main archive with walls covered in commendation certificates and purity seals. She looked up from her desk when I entered, saw something in my expression that made her set down the document she was reading. She asked if I was unwell. I told her I had found something in the historical archives that I did not understand. She gestured for me to sit. I remained standing. I explained what I had found. The inverted casualty patterns. The after-action confirmation. The repeated reference to Directive 447 Kappa. I explained it clinically, using precise language, presenting it as a filing question rather than an accusation. I told her I assumed I was misunderstanding the terminology, that I needed her expertise to correct my interpretation. She listened without interrupting. Her augmetic fingers clicked softly against her desk surface. When I finished speaking, she was quiet for 19 seconds. I counted them. Then she asked me if I had discussed this with anyone else. I told her no. She closed her eyes, breathed, opened them. Her expression had changed into something I had never seen before. Not anger, not fear. Exhaustion so deep it had carved channels in her face. She told me to close the door. I closed the door. She asked me if I truly wanted to know. If I understood that some knowledge changed you in ways that could not be reversed. That there were truths that destroyed the person who learned them. She said this with her voice steady and empty, like someone reciting a liturgy they had spoken too many times. I told her I needed to understand, that my faith required me to comprehend what I served. She looked at me with something that might have been pity. Then she opened a drawer in her desk, removed a data slate I had never seen before, and placed it in front of me. She said this was the full text of Directive 447 Kappa, that it was restricted to archivist, principal clearance and above, that I was violating protocol by reading it, that she was violating protocol by showing me, that neither of us would be the same afterward. I picked up the data slate with hands that had started shaking again. The document was brief. 3 pages. The first page was header information, authorization chains, implementation dates, classified markings. The second page was the actual directive. I will transcribe it exactly as written, because the words burn themselves into my memory with the permanence of brand scars. Par Departamento Munitorum, Strategic Resource Management Protocols. All Imperial Guard regiments shall maintain casualty rates consistent with recruitment capacity and force regeneration timelines. Projected casualties shall be allocated across operations to ensure continuous force turnover and prevent accumulation of veteran personnel in excess of command structure requirements. Operations shall be designed to produce casualty numbers aligned with strategic attrition models. Actual casualties deviating by more than 5% from allocated projections shall be investigated for operational efficiency failure. The third page contained implementation guidelines, specific percentages, acceptable variation ranges, recommended methods for achieving allocated casualties in low-threat environments, ammunition rationing, delayed artillery support, restricted retreat authorizations, tactical positioning in enfilade zones. The document treated guardsmen as a resource to be consumed at calculated rates. Not protected, not preserved, consumed. The way you would consume fuel or ammunition, deliberately, systematically, according to models and projections designed to maintain optimal force regeneration cycles. I looked at Archivist, Principal Dresch. I asked her if this was real. She said yes. I asked her how long she had known. She said since her second year of service, 29 years ago. I asked her how she could continue working, continue documenting this, continue serving a system that murdered its own soldiers to meet administrative quotas. She said the same way everyone continues. By choosing a smaller horror to prevent a larger one. By accepting that humanity's survival requires mathematics that make individuals meaningless. By understanding that if the Imperium did not maintain force turnover this way, regiments would become bloated with veterans who expected reward, who remembered enough battles to question orders, who had survived long enough to believe they deserved to continue surviving. That such expectations would fracture the military hierarchy. That the Guard's strength depended on endless waves of expendable troops who died before they could develop dangerous ideas like hope. She spoke with her voice flat and mechanical, reciting philosophy she had clearly repeated to herself for decades. She said someone had explained it to her the same way when she learned. That mercy does not scale. That compassion is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. That the directive served the same purpose as crop rotation, preventing resource depletion by ensuring continuous regeneration. The metaphor made me nauseous. Guardsmen were not crops. They were human beings with names and families and faith that their service mattered. She said that was the point. That their faith was what made the system work. That guardsmen who believed they died for victory died willingly. That revealing the truth would only make them die in despair instead of duty. That the cruelty was necessary precisely because the alternative was too terrible to permit. I asked what alternative. She said regiments that accumulated veterans eventually started asking questions. Started comparing operations. Started noticing patterns. Started organizing, started refusing orders, started fracturing into war bands loyal to individual commanders rather than the Imperium. That this had happened before, during the Age of Strife, and the result was 10,000 years of darkness. That the Departamento Munitorum learned. That Directive 447 Kappa was the Emperor's mercy encoded as mathematics. That it was better to die serving a lie than to live knowing the truth and watching the Imperium collapse. I could not breathe correctly. The air in the office felt too thick, like inhaling oil. I asked her if she believed that. If she truly thought this was justified. She closed her eyes again. When she opened them, they were wet. She said she did not know. That she had questioned it for 29 years. That she had lain awake calculating how many guardsmen had died because she processed the archives that documented their allocated deaths. That she had wanted to refuse, to resign, to expose the directive to someone who could stop it. But there was no one who could stop it, because it was policy, not corruption. Because it came from the highest levels of the Departamento Munitorum. Because it had been functioning for centuries, because the Imperium was built on foundations of necessary evil, so deep and old that removing any single stone would collapse the entire structure. She said she stayed because someone had to maintain the archives. That if she refused, they would find another scribe who asked fewer questions. That her knowledge gave her the burden of bearing witness. That perhaps someday someone would read these records and understand what had been done. That perhaps that understanding would matter. She did not sound convinced. She sounded like someone who had been telling themselves the same lie for longer than I had been alive. I asked her about my sister. The question came from somewhere beneath thought, from the part of me that had been screaming since I read the directive. My sister Kira had served in 8th Company. She had been assigned to Operation Pale Morning 3 years ago, a sweep and clear operation in an abandoned HAB sector, 0 enemy presence. The after-action report documented 39% casualties from structural collapse during demolition procedures. I had transcribed that report myself. I had filed it appropriately. I had not questioned why demolition of an empty building had killed 84 guardsmen. I had trusted that it was accident, misfortune, the random cruelty of war. Now I knew it had been allocated, predetermined. Her death had been decided before the operation began, and the demolition procedures had been designed to achieve the casualty quota, and I had documented it as operational necessity. Archivist Principal Dresch looked at me with an expression that confirmed everything before she spoke. She said she was sorry. That she had known Kira's death was allocated when she read my transcription. That she had considered telling me, but decided it would only cause pain without changing the outcome. That she had watched me process my grief, watched me find meaning in my sister's sacrifice, watched me return to work with renewed dedication because I believed her death served the Emperor's purpose. That she had envied my faith. That she remembered having faith like that before she learned what I was learning now. I hit her. My fist connected with her jaw, and she fell backward into her chair. I had never struck another person before. I was not a violent man. I was a scribe. But rage had filled the space where faith had been, and I wanted to hurt someone the way I had been hurt. She did not defend herself. She did not call for guards. She touched her lip, saw blood on her augmetic fingers, and nodded like I had confirmed something she had been expecting. She said, I should leave. That I should not return to the archive. That she would file my departure as medical leave and ensure no investigation followed. That I had a choice now, accept what I had learned and find a way to live with it, or refuse and face the consequences. I asked what consequences. She said the commissariat did not tolerate guardsmen who discovered the truth and could not maintain compliance. That there were protocols for handling personnel who learned about classified directives and showed signs of ideological instability. That most chose to accept their transformation into complicity. That those who refused were investigated for heresy, found guilty of possessing forbidden knowledge, and executed quietly to prevent contamination of unit morale. She said this with no emotion at all, like reading a weather report. She said she had processed 17 such cases in her career. That she had transcribed their interrogation records, documented their confessions, filed their execution authorizations. That she would do the same for me if I forced her to. I left her office. I walked through the archive past my station, past the servitor that clicked in Word as it shelved documents, past the other scribes who continued their work because they had not yet learned what I had learned. I walked until I reached the chapel. It was empty. The morning services had concluded hours ago. I knelt before the golden aquila, surrounded by candles that cast shifting shadows across the Emperor's symbol, and I tried to pray. The words would not come. The litany of compliance felt obscene in my mouth. My hands served the Imperium by documenting murder. My thoughts align with command by accepting calculated slaughter. My faith transcends understanding because understanding destroys faith. I knelt there for 3 hours. I wanted the Emperor to speak to me, to explain, to justify, to provide the context that would make this bearable. But the chapel remained silent except for the sound of my breathing and the soft crackle of candle flames consuming wax. The priests teach that the Emperor watches over humanity from the Golden Throne, that his will guides the Imperium, that he loves us enough to sacrifice himself eternally for our survival. If that was true, then Directive 447 Kappa was his will. The allocated deaths were his design. Kira had died because the Emperor, or those who claimed to speak for him, had decided her death served a necessary purpose. I tried to find meaning in that, tried to accept that perhaps I was too small to comprehend the scale of strategic necessity. That humanity faced threats so vast that individual lives truly meant nothing against extinction. That the Emperor's love was too large for mercy. But acceptance would not come. Because if the Imperium required the systematic murder of its faithful servants to function, then it was already lost. If survival demanded we become the evil we claim to oppose, then we had already been defeated by something worse than any external enemy. If faith required ignorance to endure, then it was not faith at all, just fear dressed in prayers. I do not know how long I remained in the chapel. Eventually Chaplain Voss found me there, still kneeling. Candles burned to stumps around me. He asked if I required spiritual counsel. I asked him if he knew about Directive 447 Kappa. His expression changed. The certainty in his eyes flickered like the dying candles. He asked where I had heard that designation. I told him I was a regimental scribe, that I had access to historical archives, that I had learned what we serve. He was quiet for a long time. Then he told me that faith exists precisely for moments when understanding fails, that the Emperor's plan encompasses suffering we cannot fathom, that our role is obedience, not comprehension. That doubt was the enemy's weapon. I asked him if he believed that. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much and said yes. Then he said no. Then he said he did not know anymore, that he had wrestled with these questions for 40 years, that he had buried too many guardsmen whose deaths served quotas instead of strategy, that he continued serving because someone had to provide comfort to the dying, even if that comfort was built on lies. He said faith and doubt were not opposites, but companions, that every priest carried both. That the question was not whether you doubted, but whether you let doubt paralyze you or drive you to continue despite uncertainty. I told him that felt like cowardice. He said, perhaps it was. That perhaps courage was refusing to serve a system you knew was wrong. That perhaps true faith meant standing against the Imperium when it betrayed its own ideals. But he said that quietly, like a confession, and then he told me to forget he had spoken. He said guardsmen who refused the system did not change it. They only died to no purpose. Their resistance forgotten, their sacrifice meaningless. He said if I wanted to honor Kira's memory, I should find a way to continue, to bear witness, to maintain the records so that someday, when the Imperium finally collapsed under the weight of its necessary evils, someone might understand what had been done and perhaps build something better. I left the chapel. I returned to my quarters. I sat on my cot and calculated. In 6 years of service, I had transcribed approximately 4,200 combat orders. If 15% contained allocated casualties following the pattern I had discovered, that meant 630 operations where guardsmen died to meet administrative quotas. If the average allocated operation killed 50 guardsmen, that was 1,500 deaths. 1,500 human beings who believed they died for the Emperor, who trusted their commanders, who had faith that their service mattered. I had documented their murders with efficiency that earned commendations. The numbers crushed me. I lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling where moisture had stained the metal in patterns that resembled continents on a world map. I thought about every guardsman I had ever seen in the refectory, in the training yards, in the barracks corridors. Young men and women who polished their lasguns and recited their prayers and believed their service was righteous, who would die according to calculations made by administrators they would never meet, in operations designed to consume them like promethium feeding engines. Their deaths justified by directives they were not permitted to know existed. I thought about the ones who would survive the allocated operations and return to barracks grateful for the Emperor's protection, never understanding that their survival was also calculated, also necessary, maintained at precise percentages to ensure proper force composition. I thought about the officers who issued the orders. Did they know? Did Colonel Harsk understand that when he transmitted tactical coordinates, his voice was implementing murder protocols? Or was he another faithful servant, executing directives from command without comprehension, believing his decisions served strategic necessity? I thought about command itself. The generals and lord commanders who designed the campaigns and assigned the companies and approved the casualty allocations. Were they monsters, or were they exhausted functionaries performing duties that had crushed their humanity decades ago? Signing death warrants with shaking hands because someone had to sign them and they had been trained to accept the burden. I thought about the system's brutal efficiency. The Departamento Munitorum had solved an impossible problem: how to maintain endless military capacity across millions of worlds while preventing the formation of veteran armies that might develop loyalty to commanders instead of the Imperium. The solution was elegant in its horror. Rotate troops through death at calculated rates. Prevent accumulation of experience. Maintain constant influx of new recruits who had not yet learned to question. The guardsmen were not protecting humanity. They were protecting the system that consumed them. Their faith was the fuel. Their ignorance was the lubricant. Their deaths were scheduled maintenance. I understood then why the directive was classified, not because it was corruption that needed hiding, but because it was doctrine that required secrecy. If guardsmen knew their deaths were allocated rather than earned through combat, the entire structure would collapse. Faith cannot survive that knowledge. Service cannot endure that certainty. The system functioned because those who died believed their deaths meant something beyond statistical necessity. Remove that belief and you no longer had soldiers. You had prisoners executing their own executions. But some had to know. The commissariat, the officer ranks above colonel. The Departamento Munitorum administrators who calculated the quotas and designed the operations. Thousands of people across the Imperium who maintained the system because they had accepted its necessity or because they lacked the courage to refuse it. Archivist Principal Dresch with her 29 years of complicity. Chaplain Voss with his 40 years of providing comfort built on lies. How many others carried this knowledge like infected wounds, festering inside them, but contained enough to prevent spread? I went to the commissariat headquarters at the 22nd hour. I requested an audience with Commissar Herne, the officer responsible for ideological compliance in our regiment. I was granted entry immediately. Commissars always made time for guardsmen who came to them voluntarily. It suggested confession rather than investigation. Commissar Herne received me in his office, a stark room decorated only with the commissariat seal and a bolt pistol mounted on the wall. He asked what troubled me. I told him everything: the archives, the directive, the allocated casualties, my sister's death. I told him because I wanted him to deny it, to tell me I had misunderstood, to restore the certainty I had lost. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked if I had discussed this with anyone else. I told him only Archivist Principal Dresch, who had confirmed it. He nodded slowly. He said I had placed him in a difficult position. That regulations required him to investigate guardsmen who possessed knowledge of classified directives and showed signs of psychological instability. That such investigations typically concluded with heresy charges and execution. But he said this without reaching for the bolt pistol on the wall. He asked me if I intended to continue serving. If I could maintain compliance despite what I had learned. I asked him if he knew about the directive. He said yes. Every commissar knew. It was part of their training, explained during their indoctrination at the Schola Progenium. They were taught that morale management required calculated sacrifice, that fear of meaningless death was more effective than fear of glorious death. That guardsmen fought harder when they understood their survival was never guaranteed. He said the directive was brutal but effective. That regiments which implemented it rigorously showed higher combat performance than those that did not. That the emperor demanded efficiency, and efficiency sometimes required cruelty. I asked him if he believed that. He looked tired. He said belief was irrelevant. That he had executed 372 guardsmen in his career for various failures of compliance. That perhaps half had deserved it. That the other half had been executed because examples needed to be made, because regulations required it, because allowing mercy in one case would demand mercy in all cases, and the system could not function that way. He said he did not enjoy his work. That he had wanted to be a teacher before the Schola Progenium identified his aptitude for maintaining discipline. That he dreamed about the faces of guardsmen he had killed. That he woke most nights and could not return to sleep. But he continued serving because someone had to bear the burden of necessary violence. Because if he refused, they would assign a commissar who enjoyed the work, who killed without hesitation or regret. He said, it was better that the position be held by someone who understood the cost, who felt the weight of each execution, who maintained enough humanity to recognize that what he did was monstrous even if it was necessary.